Hello everyone, this is Leslie Pelch at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and we will be starting the webinar in just a few moments. I'm going to give people just another minute or two to sign on. Or I should say another few seconds, not probably a full minute or two. So we're going to start today with, and this webinar, by the way, is QGIS Creating Map Layouts, Printing and Exporting. And we're going to start today with this one slide of information about how to use the GoToWebinar interface. And I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of understanding how to use it. As you can see, you can open and close the panel that you should be seeing on the right side of your screen using this little orange button. So if you find that the panel is in your way, you can't see stuff on your screen, if you just click on that button, it will make that panel kind of collapse to the side. And then when you want to bring it back out, you'll still see this little thing here, and you can just click on that orange button to open it back up again if you want to type in a question, for instance. Another thing that you might want to check, just in case anybody is having any sound issues, I'm going to point out the fact that you can adjust your audio mode if you need to. If you're not hearing stuff, make sure to open up your audio panel and check that things are set correctly in there. If for some reason you need to switch from mic and speakers to telephone, the number to call should be in there as well. Don't call the number on your screen right now. Call the number that's in your audio panel. You'll notice that you've got a questions box in your panel, and that's where you can type in questions that will come directly to me. You can type them at any time. I may not answer them till the end, depending on the questions, but you can type them in at any time. I'll probably take a look in there periodically to see if anyone's got questions. Like I said, probably questions will be answered at the end. And then I also want to point out another little button on your panel, or on this part of your panel, and that's the little raise your hand button, which is sort of an orangey yellow hand with a little green arrow on it. And if everybody could click on that button right now, that would give me some assurance that you can all hear me. I should also tell you, okay, good. A little hesitation there as to go. They can't, I'm talking to nothing. Great. If everybody could click on that, that would be really helpful. So I should also tell you, you're all right now muted, so you don't have to worry about any noise going on in the background at your end bothering anybody else, because you're all muted. And the main way for you to communicate with me is indeed through this questions box. And when you type in questions, everyone else doesn't see them. They just come to me. I think that's most of what I wanted to say. And then the final thing is that this webinar is being recorded, and I will be posting it by the end of this week, probably at the latest, within a few days, at our YouTube page. And I just want to go there right now to show you. So this is our VCGI YouTube page called Vermont Geospatial. And as you can see, we have some other webinars posted here, one of which is a little bit old and is going to get replaced after next week's webinar. But you can see that I posted our most recent one, The Promise and Reality of Free and Open Source, Introduction to the National Map. I'm getting better by getting those posted fairly quickly. And yeah, so you can view stuff on the YouTube page. At our website, you'll see a link to this, so you can always just go to YouTube and search for VCGI, Vermont Center for Geographic, Vermont Geospatial, anything like that. But if you can't figure out how to find that on YouTube, you can go to the events section of our website by clicking on this big tab on the left that says Events. And then below that, if you click on Event Archive, you'll end up in this section of our website. And notice that Webinars is linked right there. And all of each webinar just has a link that takes you right to the YouTube page, not to that specific video, to be honest, but just to the YouTube page. So as things, and actually I need to add some things to this page. So that's where that is. I think that's all I wanted to do for, oh, and that's right, the final thing is that you will receive an email about a day after this webinar is over, and it will remind you that the the recorded webinar will be posted, and I think that actually has the link. I think I changed that link so that it does actually go directly to the YouTube page so that you can see those videos, or this video or any of the others. So I think that's all we need to do for intro. And so I'm going to close this stuff down out of our way and open up Quantum. So our webinar today is going to be about using Quantum GIS or QGIS. I use version 1.7.4. I don't know if you noticed, or actually it says it up at the top as well, which is not the most recent version. Those of you who've been coming to these webinars know that I explained that I did load the 1.8 version at some point in the past 6 months or 3 months, and there were a couple things about it that were funky that I didn't understand, and to be honest, I didn't have time to figure them out, and so I decided to just go back to the previous version. There's not huge differences between the versions, so, and I will eventually catch up and become more up-to-date on the version. But for now, I'm using this version, and like I said, there's not huge differences between the different versions. Oh, actually, maybe I'll very briefly talk about QGIS. QGIS is free, open source software. Free means free. Open source means the code that actually makes it work is literally open. Anybody can get the code, download the code, change the code. There's a whole kind of community of people that work on the code. And the nice thing about that is that it means that it's never going to cost money because it's just out there. Lots of people have copies of the software, and it means there's a lot of people always working on it trying to improve it, which is why they do have new versions fairly often. And there's a fair amount of support, and there's some forums and stuff on the QGIS webpage. But if you would like to get QGIS, if you don't already have it, you can just come to this website and download it, and there's a fairly good user manual as well. And then, like I said, there are some forums that I think are linked right from here, maybe the chat page and the community page. So a lot of the people who are using it are kind of techie, so some of the discussions are a little bit above my level, for instance, and possibly above yours, but there's also some stuff that can give you answers to questions that you have about functionality and plugins and different issues. So I'll just throw that out there. So here it is. Here's QGIS. Looks a lot like ArcView for any of you who have used ArcView. Somewhat similar to ArcGIS, a little bit less intimidating in my opinion. It's a little bit simpler. And again, for anyone who hasn't participated in these before, I should mention that I'm not starting this webinar assuming that you know nothing. I'm not going to go through everything about how to use this software. I'm kind of starting at the point of assuming you've at least used it a little bit, played with it, know the basic functionality, and today we're just going to focus on really creating maps, creating the types of maps that you might want to print and publish in a variety of ways. And it's not a cartography lesson, so my focus here is not excellent design and that kind of thing. It's really just the basic functionality of how to create a map layout with the various elements that you would include in a map layout. Oh, and I feel like there was something else I was going to say that I lost. But so we're going to start off by just opening an existing project. So in order to open an existing project, there's a number of different ways, but I'm just going to click on this icon up in the upper left corner. Looks kind of like a blue folder with something in it, and for some reason it's not. Come on. Huh. So generally when your cursor hovers over an icon, it tells you what it does. And it's not doing that right at the moment. Well, if it doesn't start doing that, I might actually shut it down and turn it back on. So here's an existing exercise, an existing project, map project that I've created in the past. It's an exercise I use in the training that I do during the summer. So that just means the information that's saved within this project includes the data layers that I included in it, and really what it includes is pathways that lead to, oh, you can see there, the pathways that lead to where this data layer is on my computer in this case. So for each of these you can see that that's kind of what pops up is just the path to where this data is, shapefile data. It also saves the information about symbology that I've chosen. You know, the towns are pale yellow with gray borders, the watershed boundaries are blue, the lake is blue. It also saves things like the fact that not all of these layers are showing right now, even though they're all turned on, and that's because they are set to only show at certain scales. So it retains that information, saves that in the project. Okay, so let's say I want to make an actual map layout. I don't want to just do a screenshot or just an image of the map itself. I want a full-on map that has a title and everything. My first step has to do with these two buttons up here that kind of look like printers. One of them has a little starburst on it. One of them does not. The one that has a little starburst is basically the new Print Composer button. So the little starburst is supposed to mean, ooh, brand new. The one that doesn't have a little starburst we'll come back to a little bit later, but that's just the Print Composer button. So that would mean if you had existing layouts already set up, they would be listed in here and you could pick out which one you wanted. Since we're starting from scratch, we're going to click on the new Print Composer button. And just to show you what has happened, if you look down at the bottom of my screen, you can see that when I put my cursor over the QGIS icon, I now have two different quantum windows that are open. One is I can just go back to my map window, and the other is my Composer window, which is currently just by default called Composer 1. I want to point out that the way this works, so this obviously is our map layout over here. This is our imaginary piece of paper, and we haven't added anything to it yet. Nothing gets put in there automatically. As we start adding things, you're going to see that, so right now the item tab, there's nothing there. The general tab always refers, the general tab up here at the top, and this is an important distinction because it gets a little bit confusing, but this general tab up at the top refers to information and settings that have to do with the layout as a whole. As you can see, it mostly has to do with things like the size of your page. So this by default is some crazy metric thing, and I'm going to change it to 8.5 by 11. I'm also going to change my orientation to portrait, just because I know Vermont is vertical and I prefer to have a portrait orientation. I'm going to change the quality of the dots per inch, which is the resolution of the image that I'm going to be making, basically. I'm going to lower it a little bit. If you were doing an image, if you're creating a map that you wanted to print out on paper and have it be really good quality, you want to keep it high DPI. If you're creating a map image or a layout that you want to post on a website, on the other hand, you're creating a map, a full map with a title and everything, but what it's really going to be used for is on a website, make it a lower DPI, because the lower DPI means a smaller digital image, and by smaller I mean number of bytes. Higher DPI has more resolution, therefore it takes up a little bit more digital space. And then there's some grid stuff that we don't care about because we're not going to do grid, but you can play with all those things if you have QGIS yourself. So just remember, this general tab applies to the whole layout. As we start adding items, you'll see that the item tab is going to be changed depending on what item we're active with. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, is add a map. And notice that you've got all these pretty icons up here, and now, thank goodness, as I put my cursor over them, you get a little description of what it is. So if you can't remember what things are, you can always just hover your cursor over them. You also can always access all the same things using the layout tab. So all exactly the same options are listed here. But they actually have the name next to them, so maybe that's a little bit easier. So if I want to add a map, I click that, nothing happens. But if I now use my cursor to draw a box, there's my map. So something to keep in mind is that for this one, I'm going to delete that. For this one, you don't just click on the map. So I just did a left single click. That doesn't do anything. I need to actually draw the spot where I want that map to go in order to make it show up. You can see these little boxes in the corners. It's a fairly standard way of showing that this is the element that is selected right now. Also notice that you can change the size of the element by dragging on those corners. If you just want to move the whole thing around, just make sure you're not on one of those corner boxes. Anywhere else on that element, you can just left click, drag it around to move it. So I'm just doing left click, hold my left button down, drag it, move it around. Something that I found slightly confusing, it took me a little while to figure this out, is that right now the type of selection tool I'm using, or move item tool perhaps, is the one on the left that's called Select Move Item. That's the blue hand with the little arrow. And that, as the name implies, it means I can select or move a whole item. The one just to the right of it, on the other hand, which has the hand on the little globe, the name of it actually is very meaningful, Move Item Content. And what that allows me to do is actually, within this map frame, it allows me to move my map. Which is nice, because if you'll see that as we adjust things change, and you might just, this might end up like this, and you just want to drag it back up. So there you go. Just have to remember which hand you're using. Occasionally you forget which hand you're using, and then when you try to go, move this, like what's happening, it's not working. Just remember you need to go back and change to the other selection tool. You'll also probably notice that the degree to which our map fills up our map element box probably isn't right at the moment, and I will show you in just a second how to change that. Something to keep in mind, though, is that sometimes it might actually be better to wait till closer to the end of your process to change this, just because as you continue to mess with it and change things, you may find that every time you resize this box part, that your scale, your level of zoomed inness is not going to be right, and you're going to have to keep adjusting it. So it might actually make sense to wait until the end to do that. Just think in terms of elements right now. That's the most important thing. So we have a map element, and it's highlighted, which is important, because if it was there and it wasn't highlighted, oh no, we still can, I guess, because it's the only thing there. All right. Generally it needs to be highlighted, especially when there are multiple elements. The item tab is now always going to refer to whichever element is highlighted. So here's our map element. In the item area, item tab, we have 4 different sections. So right now it by default goes to the map section. But look down below a little bit and you'll see there's an extents section, a grid section, and a general options section. So if we're in general options, you can see all of them listed here. So these are just within the item tab. So general options has to do with the frame, which you can see it even when it's not highlighted, the frame is showing. We can turn that off if we want to, or we can change the color, and we can change the thickness. We can give it a background color, which is going to fill in that map element. Something hideous. There we go. Oh, yeah. Oh, maybe not. And generally, well, not always, but I like to get rid of the frame. That's interesting. There we go. Grid, again, we're not going to do anything with the grid, so I'm not going to go into that right here, but if you need a grid, you can see that you can show it, and then you have control over all sorts of characteristics of it. Extent, also, I'm not really going to mess with this. I think this is just a more, a different way to move the map around in there, so I'm not going to mess with that because I can just drag it around. In the map section, this is where we have control of a few important things. If we change the preview to rectangle, that turns that map element into just a placeholder. So we don't need to worry about what the map looks like. If you find it distracting to have the map there when you're really just working on the layout, you can do this. I personally find that a little bit weird because then you can't see your map. Your other 2 options are cache and render. I usually leave it on cache because what that does is it gives you your map. It'll change the way your map looks as you change things like your scale, but it won't necessarily draw the map to the highest possible resolution, so it's a little bit faster. Sometimes the render option slows you down, because then every time it redraws the map, it's drawing it perfectly, and there's not really any reason for that, I don't think. So that's our map item. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. We'll go back to resizing it, or changing the scale in a moment. Okay. So basically, you've got a map on there. You can move it around. You can do things to it. Other elements that we want to add are all accessed via these buttons. A not so obvious one is the Add New Label. So label really just means add text to this layout. So that's what we will use to do a title. You can see all I did was left click on the map, and it just stuck in this little text thing. Automatically puts in Quantum GIS. All I have to do is go over here. It automatically opens up the item tab for this item, this label or text box. And all I have to do is go in and highlight and say, all right, I want to give it a title. And I'm going to type in watershed boundaries. I can immediately change the font to something fancy, or I can change the size. Notice that the little box does not automatically resize, so I need to drag that out to change it. I can change the color. I can change the alignment, both horizontal and vertical. And this is just the margin. I guess how big of a margin. Oh, well, it doesn't seem to be doing anything automatic, so I'm not sure what the point of the margin is. So again, notice that in our item tab, we're in the label section, but there's also always a general options section within any particular item tab. So again, this is for the frame, the background of this item, and whether we want to frame it all, which I don't, so I'm going to make that go away. Oh, and I didn't mention this, but you can see that there's this third tab called Command History, and it literally keeps track of every single thing you've done, just lists it all. So if you're interested in going back and figuring out what you did wrong, I suppose that would be very handy. I would find this would drive me crazy if I looked at this too much, so I'll just go back here. All right, so we have a title, we have a map that's too small. Let's make our element a little bigger here. So other things we might want to add, probably a legend. So again, we just click, and notice that mostly what I'm doing with these buttons up here, nothing happens when I click on the button, the icon. All I'm doing is sort of turning my cursor into a tool that can now do that, can now add that particular element. So I've clicked on the Add New Vector Legend, and now I just have to do a left click on the map layout, and it just automatically creates and sticks a legend in there, which is nice, but luckily we can edit this legend quite a bit, because you'll notice that since I'm zoomed out in my map, on my map to full extent, a lot of these data layers are not actually showing. They're not visible at this scale. So I don't really want them in my legend. So that means I'm going to go into my item tab for my legend, and I'm going to start changing things. Now the general section of the item tab for the legend is where you do things like fonts, and you kind of have to play with this a little bit to figure out which of these applies to which thing. Title font is fairly obvious. That is indeed the title, which we can get rid of the title if we want to, or we can change it. Group font, in this case, there are no groupings. So if you were to change group font, you would find that nothing would happen. These are layers, however, and we can change the layer font to something, just to make sure you can see. I'll go with that. Okay, so we changed the layer font, and then again, there aren't any items in here that have fonts associated with them, so we don't need to change the item font. If you had a very complicated legend, you would find that you could have these 3 different layers in addition to the title. Symbol width, symbol height, all this stuff, this is going to change the sizes of your what are they called, swatches, your little swatches that represent the colors and the textures of your map items, map layers, the symbology. So if you want to change any of those, you do have control over those. So that's in the general section. If we go into the legend items section, this is where we actually see the list of all the items that have shown up. You can see that's the same. So the first thing that I ask myself is, do I really want all of these in here? And I think, no, I want to get rid of the ones that are not actually represented on the map at this scale. So for instance, water DLG lake poly is a data layer that you would be seeing if we were zoomed in quite a bit more, but it's not showing at this level. So I'm actually just going to delete it. And I do that by highlighting it, just a left click on it to highlight it, and click on the minus button down at the bottom. So the way we do stuff to the elements that are listed in the legend is we highlight it and go down to the bottom, and we can just get rid of it by clicking on negative. Roads also not showing at this level, so I'm going to get rid of those. Tourism, rec sites, boating points also not showing, going to get rid of those. Cadastral Conspub is conserved lands, also not showing at this scale, so get rid of that. So now I have 3 things left, and indeed, if I look at this map, I know that I have 3 things showing here. I have the watershed boundaries, the blue, I have town boundaries, and then I have Lake Champlain. Now the other thing about my legend that I don't like very much is the fact that the names of the data layers are the original names of the data layers, which means they're kind of cryptic. They're not very good for a map that I might want to hand to someone. So I can actually edit what my legend says. Now keep in mind that right now this legend was created by the information from the actual map being automatically fed into it. So that's why it had what it had on it, and that's why the names are as they are. But I can now edit it, and I'm not changing anything on my original map. I'm not changing the names of my data layers. I'm not changing what I see on that real map. Just in this composer, this layout, I can change this. I can edit this. So I highlight this first layer, water WBD8VT underscore poly, and I go down here to the icon that has a little pencil, and that's the edit. Of course, it's not showing with the hover thing right now. So I click on that, and it gives me the ability to edit this, and I'm just going to change this to watershed boundaries. And I might want to be more specific than that. I believe these are the HUC 8 watershed boundaries, so I could include that in the title if I wanted, but I'm just going to say watershed boundaries. The second thing listed here is the layer that shows Lake Champlain, so I'm just going to call that Lake Champlain. And the third one is the town boundaries. So I'm just going to type in town boundaries. Okay, so there we go. I've got a slightly more logical, understandable legend. Oh, the other thing that I can do is change the order of items in this legend. So I think I want town boundaries to be above Lake Champlain in this list. Again, it's not changing anything about the map or the order things appear on the map or the way things are drawn on the map. This is just within the legend at this point. It's just a relatively dumb element that just has some text in it and some symbols, and we can change them. So I'm going to highlight Lake Champlain, and now I can use the little arrows down at the bottom, and by clicking on the down arrow, that just pushes it down one below the town boundaries. Something else to know is that if I did all this and then I realized, oh, I did this wrong, I took out one of the data layers that is showing, I want it to come back, there's a not perfect option, but certainly an option that allows you to recover, which is if you click on the update button, which I'm not going to do right now. Well, actually, maybe I will. It's not that big a deal. Oh, it didn't do. Ah, okay. So that's interesting. When I clicked on update, I believe it just undid the one thing that. Let me just check that. No, I'm not sure what that did do. So notice that clicking on all brought back the original, the original layers that were shown and the names of the layers. So you can see all that did was go back to, like, put it back the way it was originally when it all got sucked in terms of content, not in terms of fonts, obviously. So basically, if you delete too many things and you just want to bring them all back, you can click on all and it'll bring them all back. I'm not honestly sure what update did. Update did something, but I think I missed it. Yeah. And the reason that auto update is here, I believe it means that the changes we make over here automatically show up over here. Oh, maybe that's what update is. If auto update's off. No? No, not sure. I'm blanking on what update and auto update do. All right, so we'll just not worry about the fact that my legend has now gone back to the way it was before I worked on it. And remember that we can move that around, we can resize that, although notice that the contents don't really get changed, their sizes don't get changed because we control those directly in the item, in the general areas where we change the fonts. So item options, right, item options in this particular, for this particular item options is where we go to do things like the frame. We could leave a frame and give it a background color if we wanted, or we can say never mind. Actually, legend, I usually like a frame, so we'll leave that on. Trying to think if there's anything else about the legend. Oh, like I said, if we don't even want it to say legend at the top, we just delete that. Okay, so we have a legend. So I'll mention this and I'll apologize for the fact that this is the one thing about this that I think is a little bit lame, and I swear I had a student in a class last summer who helped me figure out how to change the way the scale bar works, or rather the units on the scale bar. But just now today I was trying to remember how we did that and it didn't seem to work. So the thing that's a little bit lame about the scale bar, we click on scale bar right here, click on the map, it appears. You can see that the units are probably not something that is useful and intuitive to you. I believe that the units this is showing are meters, because those are the actual coordinate, those are the units that the coordinates in the mapping system that this data was created in uses. So the coordinates that are inherent to the data are actually meters, and therefore this is just using meters. Having a scale bar in meters is just not that helpful to most of us, I think, because we don't do metric. Even if we did, we would want kilometers. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the scale bar because I don't find it that useful until I can figure out whether I can configure it more to my own use. I'm not that impressed by the scale bar. So if anybody has any tips that they want to give me because they've played around with this, I would be happy to hear them and pass them on. I'll warn you that this little add arrow thing is not a north arrow. It's just if you want to add arrows to your layout that involve pointing. There we go. Oh, come on. All right, let's try that again. I thought I knew how to do arrows because I've done them before. Doesn't seem to. There we go. Okay, so if you wanted to put an arrow on your layout and actually point at something and perhaps put some text on here to, highlight something on your map, you can put an arrow on here. If we look at, how do we change where it's pointing? Color. Well, no, I guess I thought I knew how to do the arrow, but I really don't seem to. I've done the arrow in the past, but not recently, so again, I'm sorry. I was pretty sure that there was a thing that allowed us to change the direction that it points. There does not seem to be, so we're going to make the arrow go away as well. So that is not a north arrow, and I will show you how to put a north arrow on this little camera icon right here. And I'll just remind you that all of these are in the layout menu, and it actually says what they are. So the camera is an add image tool. And we just click on the map, and sometimes it takes a minute, so that was actually quite quick, but often I click on the map and it seems to take 30 seconds before anything shows up on the right. So don't assume that nothing has happened, just wait a minute. Nothing's going to show up in your actual image box because you haven't picked anything yet. You can see that there are a bunch of little icons to choose from, and among them are some north arrows. So we could pick something in here as a north arrow. This is also what you would use if you actually wanted to add a photograph, a logo, any other kind of image besides just all these icons, which obviously you can use these. But if you had your own logo or image or photo that you wanted to add, you would click on Add and you would navigate to it, and you would say, once you picked it, you would put it in here. Oh, this is to add this is actually to add a folder of images. Oh, so if you had a folder of images, you could add them in here, and they would actually show up down in this box, and then you would just choose it and add it in. You can see that you have some options here in terms of width and height. This just changes the width and height of your little image box, which you can also do by just dragging the corners. Okay, and you can see that this is automatically going to this particular directory. Okay, so that's adding either a north arrow or some other kind of image. Oh, you may have noticed that I use this zoom in and zoom out tool. It just sort of automatically zooms you in a set amount, zooms you out a set amount. You can always, if you're zoomed in, you can always zoom out to full extent by clicking on the one that has the little red arrows, the magnifying glass. And as with everything, when you hover over it, tells you what it is. The two arrows just to the left of the Add New Map are the kind of undo back and forth. We can add basic shapes. Here's another one that maybe takes a second. So by default, let's try that again. Yeah, by default it puts in an ellipse. You can change it. I guess it's just ellipse triangle. Obviously you have a little bit of control over what it looks like. So if you need a shape. Here's an interesting thing. So I seem to have put my little tiny dot on here by accident, and it's actually kind of behind the map element, which makes it hard for me to choose it because now it just thinks that I'm clicking on the map. There's actually an icon up here, a tool up here, that's going to let us hopefully so this tool was called the raise selected item, but we can actually also lower, and raise and lower has to do with the layering of the various elements of the map. So if you have a fairly busy map that has elements that overlap each other, at least in terms of their kind of virtual boundaries, not necessarily like the map and the legend, but you can see that the box that the map is in actually does overlap with the legend. And in this case, the little dot that I added is tucked behind. So if I lower the map, I should be able to, oh no, of course it's not going to work. Send to back. Well, so much for that. Another option is just to get it out of the way. Boy, it doesn't want to highlight this. Well, that's interesting. If I zoom in. Well, it doesn't want to let me get rid of my little tiny ellipse. Not sure why that is. All right, I'm giving up on that. Sorry. Not sure why that's not letting me choose that. One other thing I wanted to show about kind of the overall management of items on your page is that once you get a number of different elements on here and you kind of start to feel like, oh, okay, I like that. I like the way they are in relation to one another. You might want to go ahead and group them. So I've got my map element highlighted. If I hold down my Shift key, I can also highlight the watershed boundaries, the north arrow, and the legend. So now notice that they all have their little boxes around the edges of them that show that they're highlighted. And if I now go over here and click on my Group Items button, they now become one grouped item, which just means I can't accidentally change. Oh, I guess I didn't get, there we go. I can't accidentally change their orientation to each other, which is just convenient if you've gotten to the point where you think you kind of have it laid out the way you want it to. You can always ungroup them, so it's not a permanent thing. Just remember that once you ungroup them, just click somewhere off away from all of them, and then nothing's highlighted. All right, I'm just going to take a look. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if I can undo. I think I did too many things before. I had a suggestion to use undo to get rid of my dot, I think. But I think I'd already done too many things by then. Let me just... Okay, I notice that somebody else has the little hand raised thing, and I just want to point out that if you do have a specific question, go ahead and use the question box to type in your question, and that will get sent directly to me. Okay, so grouping and ungrouping are up here. Oh, and then notice that this final icon allows you to align things. So if, say, you wanted to align things like the north arrow and the legend. Oh, one other thing that you can add, which is kind of nice just because it's easy to add, is the attribute table. So if for some reason that's something that you needed to do is add an attribute table, the attribute table, you can just click on Add Attribute Table, click on your map, and there it is. Now keep in mind that this particular attribute table is showing the towns. Now that's actually an interesting question. It does not ask you which attribute table. So how did it pick that one? I forgot to check that beforehand. Oh, might be picking the one on the bottom. Let's just try something. No, still doing town names. I'm just trying to see if there's any option for it to choose a different attribute table. No, I'm not sure how it's picking that. Oh, maybe I should update. No. Okay, let's make that go back to the way it was. So notice that I'm refreshing my map so that it reflects what's actually going on in my map view. Okay, attribute table. I think that was the last thing I wanted to show, adding to your map. And then we talked about editing all of these things using the item. So again, the first few times I tried using the composer, I was a little bit confused by how much there is over here on the right, actually. So I encourage you to just play with this to where it becomes fairly logical, that general tab is always about your whole layout. The item tab obviously always relates to whichever item you have highlighted, you've chosen. Within that item tab, there's often more than you realize because there are multiple sections within the item tab. And the item tab is going to be different for every item because, for instance, when we're looking at our image, we just have lots and lots of little icons. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to point out just about these features. No. All right, so let me go back to something that I said I would go back to. In your map item, which I sort of just created and said, oh, don't worry about the fact that it looks a little bit stupid. We're going to go back and fiddle with that a little bit now. So in the map section of the item tab for the map element, notice that in this section right here, we have scale. So right now it is set to the scale is 1 to 2,500,835. So I'm going to try changing that scale to just 2 million. See what happens. So you can see that by changing the scale, it changed how much my map image, my map, actually fills up the map element. I can fiddle with that a little bit more to make it a little bit bigger. Now eventually if I were to drastically change this, so what I'm doing now is I'm making this number smaller, which is a way of zooming in essentially. So let me just change it a lot. 50,000. I've just gone from 1 to 2 million. Now I'm going to 1 to 50,000, which if you start thinking about scales, that makes sense. 1 to 2 million means you're zoomed way out. 1 to 50,000 means you're starting to zoom in. So if I do that, suddenly I'm just in one little part of the state, which isn't what I want to do. And you can see that I'm starting to see now other data layers in here. So that's not what I want to do. I want to get to a point in this particular map where I can see my full extent. So I'm going to go back to about, let's try 1,750,000. See how that looks. There. Well, no, see, I'm getting a little bit, and notice that I can move my map around a little bit. But no, I'm a little bit outside of what I can fit, so. Almost. Okay, so there we are. So now that fits within the area that I have decided is going to be my map. And my software's going to, there's another thing. So I just experienced what I'm always warning people about. If you have your Move Item Content as your selected tool, when you try to click outside of your map element and kind of highlight a different map element, it doesn't work. Oops. Need to switch my cursor back over to the Select Move Item tool, and that will allow me to move different items. So actually I could make this a little bit bigger even. That works. So like I said, not a beautiful map, not perfect cartography, but the point here is just to show you what you have control over and how to control it so that you can make it as perfect as you want to. All right, so let's say I'm done. I've done what I'm going to do. I like this. I have a variety of options in terms of what I want to do at this point. One thing I should do actually is well, I'm not going to save. I'm going to do it differently. It does automatically save everything you do in here, actually. Even if you don't save it, if you just are working on it, you do something and you shut it down, just shut it down, it does automatically save it. So we're going to go back to our Composer Manager, because remember, we're not going to create a new print composer. We're just going to go to the Manager. There's the default name for the one that I just worked on. I'm going to rename it to say Watershed Boundaries. And then show means I want to get back in there and work on it. There it is. At this point, I can choose to export it as an image, export it as a PDF, export it as an SVG, and to be honest, I don't know what that means. Or I could just print it. Print, obviously, just going to take me to whatever printers I have access to. PDF just gives me a Save As box. Image, notice that you get to choose what image format when you go to do this. You don't just have one option, you have many options. So I can do any of those things at this point, or I don't have to do anything. I can just leave it as a digital layout, essentially, and close that up. And so remember that the point of this Composer Manager is that I could do multiple layouts of this map. You know, I might do one layout that's statewide, and then I might do some other regional layouts or layouts that show different data layers. So you can use one map to do multiple map layouts, and each of them will be saved separately. And I think that was pretty much everything I needed to cover. So I'm going to take a look at what questions are in here, and I encourage all of you who have been listening quietly, if you have questions at this point, this is the good time to ask them. I'll open this back up, and I'll see if we have any questions. I have to open up my question box to be able to read them. Okay, how do I get other data layers such as parcel information or deer yards? Okay, that's a separate question from what we're covering today, but I will talk about that when we're done. Oh, all right. Valerie points out that when I put the table in the map, it looked like there was a spot to change. Oh, good point. Item. Duh. Hold on just a second. I'm glad Valerie pointed this out. This was silly of me not to remember this. So when I have the attribute table as my element, over on the right in the item tab, because remember the item tab is what controls that particular item, is where we choose which layer we want for that particular attribute table. Which attribute table essentially we want to show here. And again, we could do this multiple times. We could show a bunch if we wanted to. If there was some value to having the attribute table there, which I know there is on some maps. Thank you, Valerie, for pointing that out. And it looks like we can even choose which attributes we show. So we don't have to show all of them. We could just show whichever ones we wanted to. And we can change the order. So this, I'll just point out that although this is not most people would feel that QGIS is not nearly as powerful in terms of making map layouts as ArcGIS. It does give you a lot of control. I think I'm impressed by the fact that, again, for a free software program that's really not designed to be production map making, it nonetheless gives you quite a bit of control over stuff. Okay, let's go back and see what the other questions we have. Okay, so Ed is asking me to zoom in on one town. How do I get other data layers such as parcel information? So I think maybe is what you're asking, Ed, that if let me just get rid of this. If I zoom in on something on this map, and actually I'm just going to go back to my real map. that if I zoom in on this, then I'm going to see other data layers. And that's true, but remember, I'm still only going to see the data layers I have here. So I don't have parcel data or deer wintering yards in this particular map project. So I can zoom in, and we will indeed see some different layers start to appear, become visible. So what we have here, the green lines are roads. You're starting to see these smaller lakes and ponds. And this little black dot here is the tourism rec sites. And I'll just briefly do a quick identify on that so that you can see what that is. So that's a data layer that has all sorts of attributes. If I go down a little bit. So this is Montpelier High School. And what this data layer shows is some different types of recreational options here. And the address and the contact information. So in this particular map, I don't have that type of data. I can very briefly go back to our website at the end here and just show people how to get other data. So again, this was just a project that I had created previously that I am choosing to use to demonstrate how to do the map composition stuff. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? We're getting to the end, so people may be getting ready to leave rather than ask questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think I'm going to quickly go back over to our website and just quickly show everyone. So actually, one thing I'll do is point out the fact that down under the upcoming events here, this is today's webinar. Next week we have a webinar that is a tour of our website, and I want to emphasize that it's not just a tour of the website, it's actually a tour of the website which is going to include a focus on downloading data and also some of the things that have changed in our recent changes. We've had some fairly major recent changes that have mostly been background stuff, but also have included the website and also have included some changes to how you can access and download imagery. So we're going to go through that next week in next week's webinar. The webinar after that is actually a repeat webinar of Mapping for Emergency Management. We're going to redo that live, so it's not just replaying an existing webinar. We're going to actually do it over again because the first time we did it, it didn't happen on the date it was scheduled, and then when we did do it, the recording didn't work, and I would really like to have that recorded, so we're going to offer it again since there was a fair amount of interest in it. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to email them to me directly. Oops, let me just put my contact info on here. Oh, my contact info is right there. It's on the front page of the website, right over here. So you can just email me or call me if you have any questions that come up after the webinar. And oh, keep in mind that back at that YouTube page, we do have most, not quite all, but most of the previously recorded QGIS webinars. So we have understanding and using attribute data, layer properties, maybe just those two, and then we'll have this one posted as well. Eventually, I will have all of the QGIS related webinars posted here. So if you're interested in QGIS, these should be available soon, this winter and spring anyway. So I think I will probably stop there and hope that everybody has a good day. Thanks for joining me. And please do take a moment to fill out the very, very brief feedback survey that you will get a link to as you exit. It helps me a lot if people answer those questions and give me feedback. So thanks. Have a good day.